And he said, hey, good evening, church. We were just talking about something, but we'll come back to it later. Okay. That almost got me. Okay. Tonight we're going to be in...
No context.
Yeah, he's just...
Well, I mean, in case another bird comes through here, I'm prepared. Y'all are not prepared. Okay. And I did this morning before everybody got here. I think I heard another bird above this ceiling. But if y'all are okay, it's kind of like wearing a mask. If y'all not going to have an umbrella, I'm not going to have.
I feel like you could give it to Jake, and both of us could.
I'll just
get underneath.
Let's just do this then.
All right, we're going to be in 2 Kings. We're going to be in 2 Kings chapter 4, starting in verse 8. And we're going to be talking about the Shunammite woman tonight. And we've mentioned her and kind of briefly discussed some of the events in her life as we've talked about Elisha, as we've talked about Gehazi and Naaman over the past few weeks. And so tonight we're going to really dive into her story. And in thinking about this story, it got me thinking about important women of the Bible. And she is one of the few unnamed women of the Bible that have such an important piece of theology that we can learn from her and glean from her. Much like the woman with the issue of blood, there's a lot to learn from her, and she's an unnamed woman. The name, the woman at the well, she's an unnamed woman, but we can glean a lot of information from that. So first, let's start reading in verse 8 of chapter 4 in 2 Kings. It says, one day Elisha went on to Shunem, where a wealthy woman lived, who urged him to eat some food. So whenever he passed that way, he would turn in there to eat food. And she said to her husband, behold, now I know that this is a holy man of God who is continually passing our way. Will you pray with me? God, I thank you for tonight. God, again, I just thank you for your word. God, I thank you that your word is so powerful. Literally thousands and thousands of years ago that these words were penned on a page, but you knew that we'd be sitting here tonight and that we would be discussing this woman. And so, God, thank you for writing things down for us so that we can learn more about you, learn more about ourselves. And God, I pray that your spirit would move, and God, that your word would be illuminated to us. And God, we thank you for Jesus. In his name I pray. Amen. All right, so Elisha is going through Shunem. And so a little bit about Shunem. It's in the valley of Jezreel, and this is the land that was allotted for Issachar in Joshua chapter 19. All right. And it was near here that Saul fought his last battle with the Philistines before he killed himself in 1 Samuel. Just to kind of give you a reference on where it is geographically, it is about 15 miles southwest of the Sea of Galilee and about 10 miles north of Mount Gilboa. So all that's going to come to play here in just a little while. But the first thing I want us to notice about her is not in my notes, but something that I got later on, is that she's very discerning. Elisha would have been walking this way. Elisha would have lived on Mount Carmel. And he would have traveled through Shunem, going on his ministry, where he would go out and he would speak to the people on behalf of God, and he would minister to the people on behalf of God. And so he would pass through their going and coming from his home. And this woman saw him. And it's probably not hard to spot the prophet because of what they would be wearing. They would usually wear some kind of robe or garment that was made out of goat's hair, and it was really rugged looking. And so not very many people wore that, but it was the mantle of the prophet. And so it would have been pretty easy to spot and notice who he was. But so she notices him, sees him wearing it, and wonders, is this guy legit? And so it says here that she's a wealthy woman. She urged him to come and eat. And so most likely she had some kind of cafe set up there. It was Cafe de Shunem or whatever you want to call it. And she urged him to come and eat. And then it says, and so whenever he passed by there, he would go in and eat. And so when he would go in and eat, he would dine with them and he would fellowship with them. And over time, they built a relationship. And so it says that she told her husband, now I know that this is a holy man of God who is continually passing our way. She pretty much says, all right, I know this guy is legit. And so, what is that?
Go ahead, I'll tell you in a minute.
Okay. And so she decides we're going to do something for him. And so the first thing that we can glean from her is that she served God. Let's look at verse 10. It says, let us make a small room on the roof with walls and put there for him a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp so that whenever he comes, he can go in there. And so she served God. And it doesn't say that she did this because she wanted this or wanted that. She just said, hey, look, this guy is a legit prophet. Because in those days, there was false prophets who would go around and prophesy against what God was saying, or their prophecies wouldn't come true. But she said after dining with this man and after getting to know him over the time of him stopping in continually whenever he passed by, that she said, hey, this guy is legit. And so she saw that Elisha had a need, and she filled that need because she was compassionate. And I feel like that's a theme that's constantly occurring and as we study on Sunday nights, is that compassion is a key thing in serving God.
Well, let me explain what I just did. And I got back just in time. Some of our older folks out there will remember this. That room they made for him, they called that a prophet's chamber. And there were a lot of people. I ran to my office, so I'm out of breath. And then I had to run back and get the key, so I had to run. But it was a prophet's chamber, and people would prepare a room. They had it up in the top of the house, and he could get there. They had a table so he could study, so he could pray. And especially in the Deep South, some people used to have a prophet's chamber in their house that evangelists, preachers, traveling evangelists could come and stay. Missionaries on furlough could come and stay in their home. That's kind of gotten to be a thing of the past. Sometimes churches have a mission house, or associations will have a mission house. And my experience, and I had to tell it, when I got out of college and I moved to Pontotoc, if any of our Pontotoc friends are watching tonight, I went there as the student minister, and I couldn't find a place to live. And I eventually found me an apartment, but I couldn't find a place to live. And a lady named Miss Bernice Hale put me up. She was 80-something years old, and she had a Lincoln Town car, and she was way in her 80s, and she still drove all the way to Atlanta to the Braves game, and she had one of those Tomahawk chalk things in her car on her back window that went like that. But a real exciting old lady. But she loved missions, she loved preachers, and she had a room in her house where she would put up evangelists that came through. Her and her husband, Tommy, who had passed away. They would put preachers up, evangelists up, missionaries up. I'm not going to call any names because I'll probably mess them up, but I think some pretty famous preachers had stayed there. Well, when I couldn't find a room, she came to me and gave me a room in her house. And I'll never forget, it was an old home, but when you opened the closet doors, the lights came on. I'll never forget that. And she was really into baseball. I really wasn't at that time. And every night she would lay on my pillow some candy. When I'd been out with the youth or something like, she would lay some candy, and she would lay all the box scores from that night on my pillow. When I got in, and she fixed me breakfast every morning. And when I left her house, I finally found me a place to live. She gave me this. In my office, I have all kind of mementos from people that I've known in ministry. And Miss Bernice gave me this saucer and this mustache cup. Jason, can you get a shot of that? Jason, it's got a little thing. So when you've got a mustache, you can drink out of it, and it'll block the liquid from your mustache. A mustache cup. Can you see that?
You did that in your life.
Yeah.
That's it. That's a mustache. And Miss Bernice Hale, she had a prophet's chamber in her house.
That's
now,
awesome.
I don't know if all of that was worth it or not, but I meant to go get that cup earlier, so that's all I've got on that.
Yeah, what impressed me is just how selfless this woman was, and just how eager to serve. Because I mean, the Jews, it was written for them to be hospitable people, and and we understand that in the South, we're hospitable also, but just for her to notice this, Elijah's his habit, his path that he walks, and his schedule, and to know that he goes by, and then to go the extra mile, not just to offer him food, but then to go the extra mile to add on to her house, so that when he's coming through, he can stay there. To me, this is a woman that loves to serve and looks for opportunities to serve, and as we're going to see, to serve selflessly.
Right.
And I just started thinking about just how dangerous it is. What if she wasn't so selfless, but she was out for her own gain? And just thinking about, the reason that we serve, and just how dangerous it is in church work. I mean, when you think of like a selfish preacher who it's not so much about, him being selfless, but he's looking out for personal gain, like that is dangerous. Right. So a Sunday school teacher who's doing that,
and we've seen that.
Deacon,
yeah,
and even in the family, a selfish daddy, or something that all of us can understand is a selfish friend, somebody that only looks out for theirself, and we don't like that, and that's prideful. But this woman, I see her just being so humble, and looking to serve others, and searching for opportunities to serve. And so
it's so neat. Like this happened in 1993. Miss Bernice is long gone on to be with the Lord. But I have met these people, and I was talking with a young man that was visiting us from the other side of the country, and he was talking about when he moved from Colorado to Washington State, that people in the church, that these people just, hey, well, come on, you're going home with us today. We're going to feed you. And I was single a lot of time in ministry, and so before I got married, well, bless your heart, you're single, you can't feed yourself. Come home with us. But it's always been these people, and still to this day, there are people that they're going to bring you part of their crops. They're going to invite you. They're looking to serve the church and serve. So when I read through this, I just thought of those people, and I've got all kind of trinkets like this that remind me of people in ministry, and we ought to try to see if we can be more like that.
Yeah.
I don't think there's that many of those people around these days, because I just don't see as many as you. But the kind of person that looks like, what can I do for you? Not what can I do for you, and I'm going to have you on the hook so you can do.
Yeah.
Right.
I just want to do something for you, and I don't care if you ever do anything for me. So.
Yeah, exactly. And you said it, like, I mean, even here we see that. I mean, at Christmas time, you all know we're going to get a bag with some baked goods from folks, because they, that's what they do. And I love that. I love getting these baked goods from y'all, and eating those with my family at Christmas time. That's better than you going to a store and purchasing me anything, because to me, that's, you took time out of your day to bake and prepare and wrap and bag and then give that to me. And so, I mean, serving God in that way, it seems so, that seems so minuscule, but it means a lot. And I think one thing that we can glean from this right here of her service to God is that she made room for the Word of God in her life. And so she built this room for the prophet to come and stay. And in those days, the prophet was the Word of God. He spoke and relayed the Word of God to the people. And so she made room for the Word of God in her life to come and dwell. And we're going to see that in her story, God is going to bless her for that. So let's keep reading verse 11. One thing real quick to note is that this story, it kind of jumps time frames on you in one verse. So we just read about her meeting him, eating there. We don't know how long he ate there before she built the room. And then now he's staying in the room. We don't know how long it's been. But she says, the scripture says, one day he came there and he turned into the chamber and rested. And he said to Gehazi, his servant, call the Shunammite woman. And when he called her, she stood before him, and he said to him, say now to her, see you have taken all this trouble for us. What is to be done for you? Would you have a word spoken on your behalf to the king or to the commander of the army? And she answered, I dwell among my people. She was satisfied by God just by serving God. I want to pull off there because we're going to see another satisfaction given in just a minute. But I want to pull off there because Elijah gave her two huge options in her life. I mean, Elijah had a place of prominence in the world. He could speak and get into the ear of the king. He could speak and get into the ear of the commander of the army. And he asked her, do you want me to speak to the king for you? Do you want me to speak to the commander of the army? Because, it says that she's a well-to-do woman, that she's a pretty wealthy woman. And so she could say, yeah, put me on the king's payroll. I've got a cafe. I'd love to be the one that cooks for the king. Or she could say, yeah, I'd like some extra protection around my cafe. If you could, whisper that into the to the commander's ear. But she says, I dwell among my people. Basically, she says, no thanks necessary, right? I'm good where I'm at. And we should want to serve God just because he's God. That's what she did. We don't need to expect things from God when we serve God. Because if we do, then we become like Gehazi. We become a self-seeking servant instead of a servant that seeks to honor God and exalt Him.
Yeah.
Well, there's Matthew 10. I think it says something about Jesus is telling his disciples. It's the scripture that says, and if you give anyone a cup of cold water in my name, then and where it says, if you receive a prophet because he's a prophet, then you'll receive a prophet's reward. And if you'll receive, I can't remember, but anyway, in that it's talking about, going the extra mile. It's talking about serving for the sake of serving, and I feel like this is a godly woman, and she's showing that she's a godly woman and fulfilling, even years before, fulfilling scripture that Jesus is teaching his disciples. And that is one thing that struck me in these verses, is that she was very content person. Because, I tried to read as much as I could about these, because to me these were odd. This was an odd comment from Elijah to say, do you want me to speak to the king or to the commander of the army? I didn't know if that had to do with maybe a job or some kind of societal status that could have been given to her or her husband, or some kind of judicial injustice that could be taken care of. But regardless, her response was, I'm satisfied. And I looked up something to talk about contentment, and this convicted me, and maybe it'll be beneficial to anyone who's listening as well. But there's a quote that says, "We'll miss contentment if keeping rather than releasing becomes our objective. We too often love things and use people when we should be using things and loving people." And it says, "We are most content when we are grateful for what we own, satisfied with what we make, and generous to those in need." And I feel like that's a perfect picture of who this lady is, and if I'm honest, who I should be, that we should be people of contentment. She didn't want any kind of gain. She was just totally satisfied with serving and being used, and serving Elijah and his work. So very content lady.
The first thing that as I was studying and reading on this that jumped out is for Elisha to offer this. He obviously had the king's ear. He had the commander of the army. He had his ear. And I don't know why, but my mind ran right to Daniel and Joseph, and how God's man that is upright and righteous, not greedy for filthy lucre, they always bubble to the top. And I think about Daniel in a godless place, and the influence and how he wrote, and Joseph in the house of Potiphar with Pharaoh, that Joseph, he rose to the top. And how men of God and people of God, if we will be faithful, God will give us influence in places where we really shouldn't have influence. And so that's the first thing. I thought that was worthy of looking at. And this lady, she wasn't looking for anything. To me, and y'all have heard me preach this before, you know that, and you can see when people have their heart right, when they serve people that can do nothing for them. They're not looking for anything in return. And this lady she said, "I live among my folks." She said, and where she lived out by Jezreel, this was a rural place. The king would have been city life. And so they could have moved to the city. She said, "Hey, I live here among my folks. I love it." Today, Jennifer and I were just out riding around. Somebody put on Facebook they wanted to give a kid a turtle. Did I have a turtle around my house? And I was like, "Well, I don't." Well, Jennifer saw it. Guess what we did? We went on a turtle hunt this afternoon. We're riding down the road around the bottom, rode down by our little pond down there looking for a turtle. And we're riding down the road. We see some of our kids are over there having a graduation party. We stop in the road and talk to them. Actually stopped twice and talked to 2 different groups of kids from our community, from our church, and just talked with them a little bit. And I just looked at my wife and said, "Man, we have a good life."
Yeah.
So simple. Now, some people, I know people that love the big city. They love the hustle and bustle. They love going for the gold and more money and more stuff and everything. But this lady, I kind of identify her. She said, "Hey, I live here among my people." And that's what I feel like, and so I just looked at Jennifer and I said, we've got a good life. And she said, we really do. And so I don't know. That's just, I thought about it today. She said, hey, I got a good life right out here in the middle of nowhere, and I'm good. So.
Yep. And so she was satisfied by God just in service to God, but we're going to see that Elisha and Gehazi go a step further and give her a blessing anyway. Picking back up, she answered, I dwell among my people. And so then Elisha said, well, what then is to be done for her? Gehazi answered, well, she has no son, and her husband is old. So Elijah said, call her again. And when he had called her and she stood in the doorway, he said, at this season, about this time next year, you shall embrace a son. And she said, no, my Lord, O man of God, do not lie to your servant. But the woman conceived, and she bore a son, and about that time, the following spring, just as Elisha had said to her. And so she had no future, basically. She had a husband, and she was a very well-to-do woman, but in that society, as soon as her husband would have died, it says that he's old, so he was probably, some scholars think he was probably about 20 years older than her, which is not uncommon. That once he died, her status would have changed dramatically. Because she is a manless woman at that point. And so Elisha says, Elisha and Gehazi both say, well, we're going to bless you with a son. And it's odd because there's no indication that she wanted a son.
Right, she did not ask for it.
Right, she didn't ask for a child at all. And then her response is also odd as well, because she says, no, my Lord, O man of God, don't lie to me. And so when I was reading that, I thought, well, did she not want the child? Did she want to remain childless? And as I was reading and studying, it says, don't deceive your servant is the correct translation. And that word deceive is a Hebrew idiom that says, let whatever you say be so backed by God that it goes from beginning to end and it's all good. That's what that means, is when she says, don't deceive me. If you're going to do this for me, let it be so, and let it be so backed by God that it goes from beginning to end exactly good. And so she says this to him, and now she has a legacy where therefore she wouldn't have. Now she has a future where before she wouldn't have. And so that's a huge blessing that Elijah and Gehazi gave her.
I read that idiom as, I feel like we do it. If you say something like, quit playing, or quit
don't
joking.
tease me.
Yeah, or something like that. But, and I didn't know if, I thought a couple of things about her comment of, I've had my own people and they're trying to do something for her, and she's like, no, I'm good. I don't know if it was that just the thought or prospect of having children was just so far gone in her mind that, not to say that it was in the realm of possibility, but it was in the realm of her thought. Or, as I thought more about it, I thought that maybe this woman, because I feel like I joke and say that I'm a pessimist that poses as a realist, because I am a glass half empty kind of person. And I feel like I talked about this Wednesday with the students, and I have been and am trying to teach myself to be a glass half full kind of person. And so I feel like this woman, she very well could have said, well, I don't have this and I don't have that. But from what we've already seen is that she is such, just a content person that instead of focusing on the negatives, I feel like she lives a life where she highlights the positives, and she's, and personally, if any of you else are where I am, when I wake up and I'm in a funk, and all I want to do is focus on, what hurts me or what's bugging me that day. Well, I start to acknowledge and look at the things that God has blessed me in my life, blessed me with, like the clothes on my back, my family, a roof over my head. When I want to complain about schoolwork or going to school, I thank God that I live in a place where I can further my education and have the opportunity to go to school. And in my own life, when I've began to list the things that God has blessed me with, I never get around to the things that are bugging me and the things that are ailing me, because God's just too good to us. And so I feel like that's the mindset of this woman, that she's not focusing on, well, I'm childless, but she has these other opportunities that she's serving. And so I just think, that's where this woman's mind is. And so when Elijah says, "Hey, well, we'll give you a baby," she's like, "Quit playing with me.
Right.
Don't."
Yeah, and a lot of people. There's a lot of speculation because there's a lot of blanks in that story. Could they have had a child and lost a child before? They're childless. Of course, losing children in that time would not at birth or dying young. It's disease is not odd, and it's almost beginning to end. I see my husband leaving me. Don't bring me a child that I have to suffer that loss also. I don't know that that's what's going on here, but that's one of the possibilities.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the first thing we see is that she serves God, and it's not for her benefit. She serves God just to serve God. But however, when we serve God just to serve God, God is going to satisfy us. And to use what you said, glass half full, glass half empty. Sometimes our glass is empty, but at least we've got a glass. At least we have something that God can pour into.
That's good.
And so we can be satisfied. We just have to wait on God to do it. And so they bless her. God is blessing her in her life. And then tragedy. Let's read in verse 18. It said, "Now when the child had grown, he went out one day to his father among the reapers. And he said to his father, 'Oh, my head, my head.' And the father said to his servant, 'Carry him to his mother.' And when he had lifted him and brought him to his mother, the child sat on her lap until noon, and then he died. And she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God and shut the door behind him and went out. And then she called her husband and said, 'Send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys that I may go quickly to the man of God and come back again.' And he said, 'Why will you go to him today? It's neither new moon nor Sabbath.' And she said, 'All is well.'" So when everything went awry in her life, she knew exactly where to go. And I think the thing that we can learn from here is that it was an immediate response. A lot of times, and I know you've talked about it from the pulpit, is that, we try to do it our way. We try to fix it. And then once we get to the end of our rope, the end of the road, we're like, "Okay, God, now I'm going to turn to you, and I'm going to
fix it ourselves."
Exactly.
She had plenty of money to try to run down the road and get somebody.
Right. I mean, to seek a physician, she could have paid for it. Or on the other side, she could have just said, "Well, this is it. The prophet came, told me I was going to have a son. It came true, but he deceived me. He lied to me. Go up there and tear down that prophet's chamber right now. You take his bed, take it outside, burn it in the streets. I'm going to put a big sign across the front of our cafe that says, 'No prophets welcome here.'" She could have immediately turned away from the things of God because she asked, "Let this be so backed by God that it begins well and it ends well."
She had hope.
Yeah, she had hope, and she knew that this man, because you go back to her discernment, I truly know that this is a man of God. And so she knows exactly where she can go. She goes to the man of God because she sought God's presence, and it was her first move. And so what I really like is her response to her husband. Now, we don't know all of the conversation that went on. Like you said, there's kind of holes in the story, but she's like, "Hey, listen, I need a donkey and a servant." And the husband's like, "Why? What are you doing?" She's like, "Well, I want to run to the prophet," is what she said. "I want to run to the man of God." And he's like, "Why? It's not new moon. It's not Sabbath. Is prayer meeting tonight? What's going on?"
What's wrong?
Yeah, and she's like, "Hey, it's going to be okay.
Everything's all right.
Everything's going to be okay." And do y'all have anything right there?
I just looked at. I got caught in the details, but I looked at heat stroke and you said when your body temperature gets around 104 and you're in the beaming sun, it's kind of a series of events, and if you don't seek help, and you very, very well might die. And so all the things you said are true. And then she doesn't tell her husband. Why didn't she tell her husband? Well, he had the kid out in the hot sunshine working. It's just going to throw just a ton of guilt on him. Is his elderly condition? Does he have? She think, well, this might break his. This might kill him. So she says, "Hey, everything's going to be fine," and she goes and she doesn't tell. Like I said, that's all speculation.
Right.
But could you just imagine seeing your child, suffering, headache, their heads baking in the sun, and they lay in your arms and die. And like I say, she didn't just go crazy and lose her mind and run around the house screaming, which is probably what I would do. You know, I'd just be running through the woods. And she says, nope, I'm going to the man of God. And that's what you've heard me preach this 1,000 times. Like when you're in a storm, like when the tornado's in your yard, it's too late to find the safe place. You find God, you find a safe place in the everyday life. You know where God is, so that when the storm hits, you know where to go. Oftentimes we don't seek God till things go crazy and go haywire. This woman already knew the way, and I think that's worthy of mentioning there.
Yeah, I think my reading of this, I think that she did not tell her husband what happened, that she withheld that information because she knew what the end result was going to be. I mean, we see her moving in quickness and in haste, right, but not in hysterics.
In faith.
Faith. And I think that's what it goes down to is faith. Like she knew from the moment this tragedy struck, I know what I need to do. I know where I need to get. Wow. And I mean, not to step on the verses that we're about to go through, but she didn't let anything sidetrack or distract her on the way to Elijah. And what's interesting, probably one of the most interesting things in this, was that from the moment that she, like her response to her husband, her response to Gehazi, her response to Elijah was the same, that all is well, which literally means it's shalom, it's peace. Mm-hmm. So that was her response, peace, wow. Peace, peace, peace. And so I feel like that's something that was just kind of permeating through her.
Yeah, and I wrote down that sometimes the things and the circumstances in our life make it hard for us to say it is well, but we need to tap into that same joy and that same peace and hope and faith that this woman had, to know that we can always run to God when we get into those situations, and then let's just run to God, lay it at the feet of Jesus, and have peace about it. And so let's continue reading. So she asked for a donkey, and she got it. She told her husband, hey, all is well, all's going to be okay. She saddled the donkey, and she said to her servant, I like this. She said, urge the animal on and do not slacken the pace for me unless I tell you to. So she set out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. Now, where she lives to Mount Carmel is about 15, 20 miles, okay? And so on that donkey, it would have taken anywhere from 2 to 3 hours for her to go. And now she's a prominent woman, right? She's a woman of wealth, a woman of influence in her society. And so for her to be booking it out of town on this donkey could have been like, oh my gosh, why is she doing that? It could have been frowned upon for her to do that, going in such haste in that way. But she said, I want you to urge that. I want this donkey moving as fast as it can go.
That poor donkey that day.
Yeah, that poor donkey.
Man, that donkey got whooped.
But, and she sets out, and so she's riding 15 to 20 miles, 2 to 3 hours of hard, constant riding on this donkey. And when the man of God saw her coming, he said to Gehazi, look, there's the Shunammite woman. Run at once to meet her, and say to her, is all well with you? Is all well with your husband? Is all well with your child? Now, this is a different is all well than what she was saying. He was asking, is everything okay with your health and with your wellness? He was asking like, hey man, are you doing okay? And her response is, as Justin said, it will be okay. I've got peace about it. And then it says, and when she came to the mountain to the man of God, she caught hold of his feet. She sought God's presence. The first thing she did was worship. When she got to the presence of God, the first thing she did was fall down and worship God because of who he is and what he's done in her life. And I think that's a lesson that we can learn as well. A lot of times we go to God in prayer and we're like, God, I want you to do this. God, I want you to do this. God, do this for me. God, do this for me. Sometimes we need to fall down and just worship God for who he is and what he's done in our lives before we come and start petitioning. Justin talks about it all the time, the acts of prayer. And you can talk about that if you want to.
Yeah, well, nobody likes that friend, which I think we've all been that person that, you don't talk to them in a while, and when the phone rings, they're only going to be asking for something. Matt Thompson, I'm sorry. The only time I call Matt Thompson is because when I'm having computer trouble, so I am that friend. And, a lot of times I feel like, even though, as we see in this, we've seen in passages in the past that God does hear and answer those cries and prayers of desperation. But I don't know. I feel like a lot of times we treat God like he's some kind of Santa Claus in the sky or some kind of candy machine. If we put our 25-cent prayer in and turn then we'll get a little prize. And but I feel like, you know, this me personally, I feel like my mind is in the best place, and it's different for cries and prayers of desperation. But I feel like my mind is in the best place when we go through the acts, which is adoration, confession, thanksgiving, and supplication. So when we enter prayer, adoring God for who he is and for what he's done, we got our mind right and understand, you know, who we're talking to, you know, the powerful God that we serve and how extensive his love is for us, and then thank him for what he's done. And then, you know, and so then I feel like we're to the point to where we have the right heart to then ask him for things, and we won't. And for me, sometimes I'll have something in my head, something that's bugging me, and I'll pray to God for it, and it's such a big deal to me. But once, you know, once I go through that adoration, that confession, that thanksgiving, and my heart is right, I feel like my head's in the right place, then I've found that what I thought was so important that I'm bringing before God is not so important at all. It's more of a selfish thing than it is anything else. And so, but you know, what's interesting about this is when it says that she took hold of his feet, that word literally means to seize, to grab hold of them. You think about when you come home and your kids latch on to each one of your ankles and make it hard for you to move. You try to kick them off and you can't. That's literally what this lady did. As soon as she saw Elijah, she latched hold of his legs and would not let go. And so to me, that's desperation. That's a woman. Gehazi, you know, whether he was good intentioned, but she was not going to be sidetracked by Gehazi. She told that servant, "Don't you slow down unless I tell you to slow down." Not hysterical, but moving in haste. And she wasn't gonna unload everything to Gehazi, because she knew that the sooner she got to Elijah, the better off she was going to be. And when she found this dude, she laid hold of his feet. And from the reading of this, to me, she wouldn't let go.
That's you think of Jacob wrestling the angel.
Yep.
I'm not letting go till you bless me.
Exactly.
Right. And jump in the New Testament, you can think of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was not going to be turned aside. He was going to see Jesus. And the woman with issue of blood, nothing was going to keep her from, you know, she was going to hang on. The guys with the friend, they dropped through the roof to see Jesus. There was, you know, there weren't, and, you know, we need a good dose of that. That hey, we're going to hang on, you know, and maybe we give up too easy, and maybe we are too pessimistic, and maybe, you know, I've never really had the kind of faith that I'm talking about right now. But being in ministry this long, I've been around so many people going through things and facing things that are just, how do you get to the other side of this? How do you carry on when death is so final? This thing, whatever's happened, is so tragic. And I've just kind of stood back as a pastor, as a minister, to support staff, in years past, and this past ever how many years I've been doing this, and just like, where do you get that kind of faith? You know, and you see that, and you get older and you grow and you learn, and you see when God proves himself over and over and over again. But in life, in ministry, I've seen so many people like this woman that I'm going into surgery. There's a real good chance I'm not coming out. And I never forget, in Tupelo, I was holding on to a guy's leg. He was going on. They were going to split his chest open. And he looked at me and he said, "Brother Scott, the way I see it, either way this turns out, I win." I was like, man, that's good.
Mr. Larry.
Yeah.
I always think about Mr. Larry's cardboard testimony.
Yeah.
Cancer, and he was like, either way, I'm a winner.
That's good.
You know. And so let's finish the story. And so it says, and Gehazi came to push her away. This is the latter part of verse 27. It says, Gehazi came to push her away, but the man of God said, "Leave her alone, for she's in bitter distress, and the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me." And then she said, "Did I ask my Lord for a son? Did I not say, 'Don't deceive me'?" And so here again, she still isn't asking for her son to be revived, right? But she's saying, did I ever even ask for a son? Yeah. No, you blessed me with it, and I'm grateful for it, but I asked you, let it be so backed by God that it begins well and it ends well.
So, yeah, when we get to verse 28, I think it answers our discussion. It's like, hey, man, I didn't ask for a son. Don't do this. Don't deceive me. Whatever you can read into that, I had enough pain in my life. Don't give me this son just to take him away. I think verse 28 kind of answers our discussion on what she meant originally.
Right. And then verse 29, and so he said to Gehazi, tie up your garment and take my staff in your hand and go. If you meet anyone, don't greet him. And if anyone greets you, don't reply. Lay my staff on the face of the child. And then the mother of the child said, as the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. If you remember back when we talked about Elijah, this phrase is the exact phrase that Elisha used, because you remember everywhere that they went on that trip before Elijah was taken up in the chariot, he told Elisha, stay here, I'm going on. And Elisha said, as the Lord lives, I'm going with you. This is the exact phrase that he used to speak to his predecessor. And so you have to think that in his mind, when she says this, boom, every memory of that journey that they took came back to him.
That's good.
And also, now remember, I told you in this chapter, in this verses here, that we're skipping time frames, right? So we go from she sees him, he eats with her for a couple times, and then she builds him a house, a room. He lives in there a couple times as he's passing through, blesses him with a son. Now, he would still be passing through this area, and every time that he would pass by her, he would stop and eat, and he would stay in that room. He probably got to know this boy. This boy probably almost, we got good friends, and you'd be like, your kids call me Uncle Jake, but I'm not their uncle. It's just we're such good friends that they call me Uncle Jake. And so I think that this was almost like this relationship with Elisha, that him finding out right now that this woman's child has died would crush him. Yeah. It broke his spirit. And you can see it in the way that he directed Gehazi, go, and I want you to run as fast as you can. If somebody meets you, do not stop. If they wave at you, you're on a mission, you're going, you take my staff and you get there. And so her response, as the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. She wasn't going home without the presence of God going with her. And I think that's something that we can take too. When we come to church and we dwell in fellowship with one another and the presence of God fills this room, I don't think it should stay here. I think that when we leave the doors, we should leave the doors different than when we entered, and it's because we've been touched and because we've taken the presence of God in our lives with us. And that's something that she did. Now, to finish out the story, just for time's sake, do y'all have anything right there? Okay. To finish out the story on time's sake, Gehazi, it didn't work for him. He goes in and he lays the staff on the child's face. And now, granted, Gehazi doesn't know what he's doing right here. He's never witnessed this as far as we know. But Elisha has, because Elijah raised a kid at one point. So the child has not awakened, is what Gehazi tells them. And when Elisha came into the house, he saw the child laying on his own bed. And so he went in and shut the door behind them, and the first thing he did was he prayed to God. And so this is another part where I think that Elisha was kind of broken by this. And so he walked in the room. He was probably devastated to see the child laying there lifeless on his bed. And so he prayed to God to get in that right mindset before continuing. And it says, then he went up and he laid on the child, putting his mouth on the mouth of the child and his eyes on the eyes of the child and his hands on his hands. And he stretched himself upon him, and the face and the flesh of the child became warm. And then he got up again and he walked once back and forth into the house and went up and stretched himself upon the child. The child sneezed 7 times, and then the child opened his eyes. And so we see now the revival of her son, the resurrection of her son. And then the heart of the woman is seen one more time. He says, then he summoned Gehazi and said, call the Shunammite woman. And he called her, and when she came to him, he said, pick up your son. But notice what she does. She fell at his feet, bowing to the ground, and then she picked up her son and went out.
That's good.
How many of us would watch our kids die, go to God in prayer, and then God answer our prayer and not immediately pick our kid up?
Go to God first.
She went straight back to worshiping and praising God for what he's done in her life one more time before she ever picked her child up. And that's amazing. That's amazing. We could see the heart of this woman, as Justin was talking about in our first point, that she loved to serve God. And it's true in the way that she sought God, and it's true in the way that God satisfies her because of her service to him. Do y'all got anything else right there?
Oh, that's good.
All right, so one thing that I want us to notice, did you have anything?
No, okay.
One thing that I want us to notice is that she knew exactly where to go to get to the throne of heaven. She went straight to the man of God. And so I want to ask you, can you list out 5 people in your life that you know when tragedy strikes in your life, I can go to Mr. So-and-so or I can go to Miss So-and-so because I know that when they pray, they're going straight to the throne of God.
Absolutely. I've said it before. I'm not going to say it on the air, but I know such powerful prayer warriors, to use a phrase, that there's no doubt that if and I'm going to get a bad diagnosis one day. It's going to happen. I know the first 2 or 3 phone calls that I'm going to make.
I do too.
To mortals. Of course, you're going to hit the Lord and plead with him first. But there are people I would definitely, I'm not going to name them, but they know who they are.
Yeah. And here's my next question. Are you on someone's list? Are you one of somebody's 5 people that they know, hey, I can go to Justin, I can go to Jake, I can go to Brother Scott because I know they're going to pray into the throne room of God for me. And then the reason I ask that is because, and I'm not going to name anybody because I didn't ask their permission, but there's a man that sits over there, and I know that if I need prayer, I can go straight to him. And I know that he is going to lift my name to the throne and that God is going to hear the words that come out of his mouth and from his heart.
Awesome.
But Knox is not going to have that man. When Knox is 25, 30 years old, that man's most likely going to be in heaven. And so who is Knox going to call on? Who's Everett going to call on? Who's Lydia going to call on in those days? You know, you have got to be the person and be such a prayer warrior and seek to serve God and seek to just seek God's presence in your life so much so that you're on somebody's list.
Wow.
And so that's it.
What a great challenge at the end. Get me weeping, and I don't need to do that. Thank y'all for looking in tonight. Don't forget, next Sunday we will still be live streaming, but the next Sunday after that, the first Sunday in July, we will be live in person. Come to church, spread out, wear a mask if you want to wear a mask. We respect all views on this stuff. Don't wear one, wear one. We'll talk more about that. I'll be sending out a video to you pretty soon. But don't forget, baby dedication, June 21st. You can go on the Wyatt Baptist app. If you haven't downloaded it yet, do that. You can register your child for baby dedication. Be at the end of the 8:30 service on June 21st. At the beginning of the 10 o'clock service, we'll be back in the sanctuary. On July the 5th, the first Sunday in July, the Sunday school will return. 8:30, Sunday school and worship. 10 o'clock, Sunday school and worship. And that'll be an awesome day. Also, the first week in July, Wednesday night will return over at the Family Life Center. All the Sunday nights in July, we're not going to be back in here because we're going to do Vacation Bible School. 4 Sundays in July, the first Sunday in August. A special thing they've asked us to do, these folks came up with it, I think it's a great idea, is every night we are going to recap what your children have talked about in Vacation Bible School. Special edition each night, each one of those Sunday nights of Table for 3, but we'll be recapping the Vacation Bible School story. I am looking forward to that. Sunday, August 9th, everything, even Sunday nights, be back to normal. Wednesday nights, everything will be right. Wednesday, August the 12th, that Wednesday night, everything goes right. We will return to our Wednesday night meal. And after that, we are as right as rain, and we're headed back to normalcy, or as normal as you can be in Wyatt, Mississippi. God bless y'all. We love you. We have fun doing this. We can't wait to do this in person with all of us sitting in here. See y'all. Y'all have a lovely evening.